So this is the first topic, Inventory Management 101, where we'll be covering the basic or fundamental concepts in inventory management. And let's start with watching a video about the Dabawalas of Mumbai. So what is inventory management? Inventory management deals with the flow of products, information, and finances across the supply chain. And there can be many stages in the supply chain, including suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, retailers, and consumers, and so on. There can also be multiple levels in between. So inventory management deals with physical goods or products. This includes receiving your own raw materials or how you manufacture your own products. This includes internal logistics, where you have to store and transport these raw materials or finished goods between or work in progress between the various facilities. It includes delivery to the retailers or the end consumers. And sometimes it also includes reverse logistics, where you need to collect used products from end consumers or from retailers for recycling. This includes information, so of course order information, how many, send me 7 units or 20 units. So how much does your customer want you to deliver to them? And sometimes you also want to collect information from your customers to help you make a better demand forecast. So how do you collect this information from retailers or consumers to have better forecasts of demand? And finally, finances, how do you receive payments, or how do you pay your suppliers, and so on. So let's look at a case study of Coca-Cola in Africa, where logistics is more challenging. So drinks are mostly sold in independently owned shops in cities, but also villages and rather remote locations like this shack here. And one thing that's different from how Coca-Cola is consumed in Hong Kong or in developed countries is most of the soda is consumed in the store in a glass bottle, which is usually returned and reused. So this is where reverse logistics comes in. Coca-Cola often collects the glass bottles, cleans them, and then fills them up with new Coca-Cola and sells them again. And as you notice from this shop, there's a lot of posters, signs, and there's even a refrigerator, I think, here. So Coca-Cola often supplies owners with sales infrastructure that I just mentioned. And refrigerators depends on whether the shop has electricity. I believe some rural areas, if they have solar panels, could support small solar-powered fridges. So even in some very remote places in Africa, if you can afford it, you could buy and enjoy an ice-cold Coca-Cola. And Coca-Cola even helps the delivery people make their routes more efficient by perhaps knowing about the map and the travel times and helping them plan their routes, for example. So the main points for this case study is that logistics can be an interesting challenge in developing countries, although logistics in developed countries may not be easy either. I wanted to mention that inventory management can also be known as supply chain management or logistics. These are basically terms that have the exact same meaning. Okay, so now let's get to the concept of inventory. So what is inventory? Inventory is also known as consumables or stock in British English. And basically, inventory is something that you consume and use up in the process of producing products or serving customers. And because this can be used up, you need to reorder the inventory fairly frequently. So I wanted to give this example to help students differentiate between inventory versus equipment or assets. So suppose you are a dairy farmer, so you produce and sell milk. Not that you produce the milk, I mean your cows do, obviously. Don't be silly. So a dairy cow would be your equipment or your assets, because a cow is basically a biological machine that turns feed into milk. And your inventory might be your feed, like your hay, your soybeans in America, or what grain, whatever they feed the cattle or the grain. All right. So typically, a cow can produce milk for about 18 months after calving, meaning giving birth to a calf. So you don't really reorder dairy cows regularly, but you might only have enough feed for a few days, or a few weeks. So you reorder the feed much more often than you order cows. In inventory management, there are basically two problems: stockouts or overstocking. So this is an example of stockouts where shelves were basically empty for bottled water, except the super expensive ones, glass bottles. I believe these might be the fizzy ones. So the still water was basically all sold out before Hurricane Sandy, which was a major hurricane that hit the eastern part of the United States in 2012. The second problem is overstocking, when you have lots of products but you can't sell them. So in this example, you can click the link if you're interested. So the company called Snap, which is the parent company of Snapchat, with the hot social media thing before TikTok, basically. So this company, Snap, produced this product called Spectacles. Here's a camera where you can record whatever you're seeing, and here's a blinking red light that shows that you're recording. I don't know why this product looks pretty cool, but it didn't sell well. I don't know, because it's very creepy. Anyway, so the people at Snap were hoping that they could sell lots of this product, and the users would upload more videos to Snap. But because the product was not successful, they had to write down and take this as losses for spectacles they were not able to sell. So basically, the objective of inventory management is to have the happy medium, where you have the just right amount of inventory. You don't want too much and you don't want too little. Alright, so now let's go to the types of inventory. There are 4 types that we will talk about in this course. First is raw materials and component parts. And the second type is work in process inventory. The third type is finished goods. So that means those products that are finished and you can sell them or allow consumers to consume them. The last type is maintenance, repair, and operating supplies, or MRO inventory. This type is a little bit strange. Basically, those are other things that the company needs to maintain inventory of, but they're not direct inputs into the primary products produced by the company, but they're more like inventory that's needed indirectly. Here's a very simple example to show you what's the difference between raw materials, so what you get from your supplier, work in process, where you started work but it's not finished yet, and finished goods, which is what consumers can purchase or consume. So now let's talk about the reasons why companies hold inventory. The first reason is to balance supply and demand. So if you think about potatoes and French fries, so French fries are made with potatoes, as we all know. Potatoes are a product biological products, they kind of grow with a certain season. So there's a certain few weeks where you harvest lots of potatoes, but other weeks, most months of the year, the potatoes are just growing. So what this means is the supply of potatoes is flat, and then a huge spike, and then flat. But the demand for French fries is basically flat at a reasonably high level. So there's a mismatch between the supply of potatoes and the demand for potatoes from French fries. So what this means is various companies involved in the French fry supply chain have to hold stock of potatoes to turn them into French fries later. Here's a picture. The second reason is about economies of scale in production, purchasing, and transportation. So if you think about a very large crude carrier, which is shown here, or this might be an ultra large crude carrier, it can hold 200,000 barrels of oil or something like that. So this sort of ship is used to transport oil from, say, Iran to China, for example. Now, these ships are so huge because it's cheaper on a per unit cost to transport huge amounts. So that's why they build huge ships. Related to reason number 3, when you have these huge ships traveling from Iran to China, there's quite a long lead time. I think it's something like the order of weeks, a few weeks. So because of this, you need to store a lot of oil in China so that people in China can use that oil, because the next time you get a new shipment is going to be a few months. So the next reason, number 4, is uncertainty in supply or demand. If you think about a sweater such as this, most clothes are actually made in Bangladesh, and this can be made 6 months before it is sold in Asia or in Europe or in the Americas. So the problem with clothes like this, besides the lead time, is also you're not quite sure what styles or what colors will be popular, but you have to make them in advance. So because it takes a long time to make them and to get new stock, you just buy a lot and hope your guesses, the amounts you buy, you can sell them. Finally, the final reason for holding inventory is appreciation of value. So here's a picture showing a wine cellar where red wine is aged in these wooden barrels. And some of you, even if you don't drink wine, you probably know that wine can get more expensive over time, especially those good cohorts of wine. So many cellars will hold wine for multiple years as they age and gain value. So now let's talk about some of the costs related to inventory. So the most important cost is the stock shortage or stock out cost, where you don't have products on the shelf, and so customers may decide not to buy. Customers can't buy the products that they want, and customers might even decide not to come to your store anymore if it's products that they expect to be in stock. So for example, if your nearby supermarket doesn't have the ice cream or the eggs or the milk that you want, you might decide, I'm not going back there again, I'm going to go to another supermarket. Another very important cost is the carrying or holding costs. So if you're carrying a lot of inventory, then you need to have a large storage space. So this could be a warehouse, for example. And there are other costs associated with this, such as the rent, the electricity, the labor involved in storing a lot of stuff. There's also transportation costs. So when you transport transport your goods between facilities or deliver goods to retailers. That's transportation cost. There may be order costs when you order things from your suppliers, and there could be setup costs. This is more in the context of manufacturing. So for example, different shapes of pasta require different baking temperatures. So when you've manufactured this type of pasta and want to switch to this one, you need to leave the oven idle for some time to adjust the temperature. Now let's go on to metrics. How do we measure the supply chain performance? So the first metric is the service level, and Wikipedia describes the service level as measuring the performance of a system. This is a very general definition because basically almost every system, you can measure the service level in some sense. And the exact definition does depend on the context. So, for example, percentage of calls answered in a call center is one way to measure a service level. We're focusing more on a product's service level in today's lecture. So, I think the metric that might be more appropriate in our inventory management context would be something like this: percentage of customers that do not experience a stockouts. The second measure is the inventory turnover, and basically it's defined as the number of times inventory is sold or used in a time period such as a year. And this metric can be used to compare businesses to see which businesses have better use of their inventory and which businesses have excess inventory compared to their sales. Okay, let's look at this example to illustrate what inventory turnover means. So let's say there's a store and it sells 600 units of a product in a year. And the shelf is usually full with an average inventory level of 100 units. So this means each year the store fills up and sells 6 shelves per year. This means the annual inventory turnover for that store is 6 turns. So I wanted to mention an important point, which is the inventory turnover is very much dependent on which product or which industry you are looking at. So let's do this exercise in class. Which product has a higher inventory turnover? Or which retailer has a higher inventory turnover? Okay, when you look at metrics, you need to remember, are you playing golf or are you playing football? So for example, in golf, the higher the number of strokes you take to complete a course, the worse you get. So high scores are bad in golf. But in football, the more goals you score, the better. So high scores are good in football. In this case, we're basically playing football. So companies want to achieve high service levels because that means more demand is satisfied and more revenue is captured. Companies also want to achieve high inventory turnover. If you have the same service level, but you have higher inventory turnover, that basically means you have less inventory, a lower inventory level, and less inventory holding costs. So because of this, these two metrics actually have a trade-off between them. So life is all about trade-offs. So if you want a super high service level, you can do this by having mountains and mountains of inventory, but your inventory turnover would be very low and your inventory costs would be very high. On the other hand, if you want very high inventory turnover, one way to do this is to have very, very low inventory levels. But if you do this, you would have a lot of unmet customer demand. So the company's goal is basically to have a high service level while maintaining a reasonable inventory turnover. Whew, that was a long topic. What are the key takeaways? So we've talked about what is involved in inventory management. We've talked all about that inventory. We've talked about the definition of inventory, the types of inventory, reasons to hold inventory, and the costs of holding inventory. Costs of inventory. We've also looked at two very important metrics, the service level and the inventory turnover. So that's all for this topic.